All
Hey.
right. Welcome back to the best podcast for educational and behavioral nerds out there.
Yeah.
Ignited.
Where you feel remoralized and re-energized.
That is our goal. And today we are going to be talking about chapter 5 of Make Me by Eric Tashalis. I'm trying to get to the title right now. It's Understanding Resistance Psychologically and Why Should I Try? Which is a big question our students don't necessarily ask us word for word, but they ask us behaviorally every single day. And I think in every episode we make our content very relatable for educators. But I feel like this one especially is going to be very relatable and very actionable for educators. So, without further ado, shall you open us with a summary, Brittany?
Oh yeah. All right. So
Also, when I just said shall, do you ever see those videos of people who just talk in Old English? Have
no,
you
I
seen those?
mean,
Oh, I mean, I've seen a few of them pop up, and I was thinking, how funny would it be if we one day record an episode in Old English for the podcast? How
um,
absurd.
it's so hard to speak like that.
And to stay
I've
consistent.
yeah, I have read like I read Jane Austen,
Mhm.
um, and I wanna say Charles Darwin, and that's not true. It's not Charles Darwin. Who's the other really popular writer at that time, who wrote, Christmas Carol?
Oh, this can be a quick Google search.
Oh, come he's why I'm blanking on his name.
Is it
Is it
Charles
Charles?
Dickens?
Charles Dickens.
Let me
Yes.
see. Yeah, Charles Dickens. Google
Okay, so,
confirmed it.
um I've tried to read Charles Dickens, but the Old English is so hard to get used to.
So I'm actually an English major, and so I spent many years of my life reading like the William Shakespeare's and things like that. So I came up with a strategy that I don't know if
Mhm,
it's very effective, but it worked for me. You
mhm,
know, when you're like hiking or you're walking on snow down a hill, if
mhm.
you try to go really slow, you're gonna fall over. But if you kind of like run with the anticipation of falling over, you're okay. I kind of read the books like that. So like I would read through it a bit
Uh,
faster, but I feel like I got more out of it that way than
huh.
reading it super slowly, if that makes sense.
So, for me, um, when I was reading Jane Austen because I was obsessed with, Pride and Prejudice when
Mhm.
it came out in the early 2000s. I love that movie. Um, and so I'm like, "Okay, well, I have obsessed over the movie, and now I wanna read the book." And I had to, like, break down the first 3 chapters, like, sentence by sentence,
Yeah.
and then I started getting used to, like, the patterns
Mhm.
of the speech, and then I was able to, like, read it faster. But that was something because just the different way everything's phrased really threw
And
me.
then when you read the really older texts where I think it's an S looks like an F, lowercase cursive f.
Oh,
That one really threw me off too.
yeah, no,
Well,
I'm not trying to do
we
all
will
that.
not be delivering the podcast for you in Old English today.
Yet. Yeah.
Yet. Who knows? Maybe that'll be a season 3 feat that we accomplish.
There's
But
a goal.
yeah, you are going to deliver a dope summary right now, though. I know that
You.
for certain.
All right.
You ready?
Yeah.
Here we go.
All right. So, chapter 5, Why Should I Try, was all about student motivation and the motivation that drives opposition. So, in this chapter, he Eric Deschalis really emphasizes that learning is not just a cognitive experience, it is something we feel, and our emotions drive motivation. And if you follow me, you know that I am all about the 5 needs. The 5 needs, it's the framework for all of my resources and trainings. And the 5 needs are safety, comfort, autonomy, belonging, and competency. And he dives into autonomy, belonging, and competency in this chapter because that is a part of self determination theory, which is um, the backbone of intrinsic motivation. So, in order to experience intrinsic motivation, a person has to feel autonomous, relatedness, or that they belong to their community, and they have to feel competent. And in this chapter, he gives actionable steps to increasing those feelings, those needs. And the big overarching theme of the chapter is that when students aren't motivated, punishments, lectures, rewards are not going to increase motivation. We actually have to look at those psychological needs.
Perfect ending for that one.
Hey.
All right. Stretch.
Yeah.
Get ready for this.
Let me put up my timer. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
3, 2, 1.
All
Go.
right. In chapter 5, why should I try? The motivations that drive opposition. Eric Tashalis talks about what's really going on in a kid's brain when they refuse or when they resist doing something, be it academic, be it a directive that we're giving. It's a lot more than just, oh, they're apathetic or they don't want to do it. There's a lot that goes on beneath the surface. So I'm going to cheat a little bit because Eric gave us a great summary paragraph on page 93. And it says this chapter examines the role that internal processes play in shaping adolescents' resistance in school. The goal in this treatment is to reveal the powerful undercurrents and motivations, mindsets, emotions, and skills that direct students' feelings and behaviors and often prompt students to resist. Here, the conflicted nature of education is understood not as an impediment to learning, but as an essential component of healthy processes in which students find meaning, form identities, and build relationships. And I think all throughout this chapter, Eric really normalizes having these motivations. Sorry, you see my cat come up on the screen right now? I think he really normalizes this resistance happening. For people listening, my cat just literally walked across the computer screen right now. This is a very rough summary for me. He also talked about things that us as educators can do to increase our student motivation. So one of those things is the 6 R's, which is, let me get to it now because I lost my page trying to move my cat. The 6 R's are relevance, results, relationships, reciprocity, rigor, and responsiveness, which we're going to dive into more. All right, we'll stop there.
Muffin had a cameo.
She sure did. She was like, nope, I'm in this episode right now.
That's hilarious.
And there's nothing you can do about it.
We should include her on our little thumbnail.
Honestly,
like
she's always here.
Muffin's face.
She typically sits in the chair next to me and watches me. But she doesn't typically crawl across the screen like that.
No, that was the first. Usually she's behind you on your shoulders.
Oh yeah, she'll sit there. She's been very clingy.
Muffin!
I think it's because she sensed that we're traveling again soon.
Oi.
Yeah. All right. Anyways, let's dive into some of the content from this reading. And one of the things I wanted to address is how necessary it is to get into the emotions while teaching and get into the quote unquote touchy-feely aspect of working with people, because we work with real people who have real emotions. And I'm sure anybody listening right now can think about a time where they've had a coworker be like, well, I want to handle the emotional aspect of things. I just want to teach my content.
Mhm.
But that's not real.
Mm-mm.
Like, it doesn't exist
Right.
like that, you know? Navigating emotions is critical in what we do
Right.
every single day. And so I have a quote. It's a bit of a longer one, but I liked this metaphor a lot, so I wanted to read it. And it comes from page 97. And it is talking about why we shouldn't be annoyed with our students' resistance. And it says, for the educator to be annoyed or inconvenienced by this resistance would be like a physician being irritated or disrupted by a patient's pain. Both the resistance and the pain tell the professional that something important is happening. A doctor uses pain, where it's located, how it presents when it occurs, the way it feels when it goes away, to figure out what might be wrong. Doctors treat pain as a symptom of something wrong, not the wrong thing itself. Resistance in the classroom might be approached in the same manner. Although resisting students may be attempting to withhold their best efforts, to undermine the teacher, to avoid cooperating with others, or to disrupt the flow of a lesson, these students are also conveying a good deal of information in their opposition. Like pain, resistance is often only a surface indicator of deeper issues that require professionals' attention.
Yes. I touch on this a lot in my content in coaching. Um, and I developed the workshop series, which is all about teacher regulation in dealing with student behavior. And that's really where that irritation comes from, is our own lack of feeling competent. Because when a doctor hears symptoms, there's a formulaic way that that doctor diagnoses. That
Yeah.
doctor feels competent, that they can help the patient. They've helped the patient before, or they've helped patients with similar symptoms before. They have high levels of supports. They've got technology.
And that they
And
don't feel triggered by the
right,
patient's symptoms.
right.
It's
Um,
expected.
yeah, the patient or the doctor isn't taking the patient's symptoms personally. So, which is actually kind of I don't wanna say crazy because that's very ableist, but it's that is a very weird reaction to have to the symptoms that is student behavior, is that we take it personally, like it is
Well,
an affront on us.
I think the other thing is too, though, that like a doctor versus a doctor is one on one,
Oh, yeah.
whereas a teacher can be one on 30.
Right, right.
And a doctor's not evaluated necessarily, I don't think, on like if the patient gets well. I think people ultimately understand like their body does what their body does. Like you can get put in like the right direction
Mhm.
and like receive treatment and supports and things like that. Um, but I don't think people are going around evaluating a doctor and being like, okay, 10 years later, how healthy is this person? Are they?
Um, from what I understand, there are evaluation systems in place for I mean, my best friend is a nurse practitioner, and,
Mhm.
I know that, 1, she takes her patients' health very seriously,
Yeah.
so it's even if she wasn't getting evaluated, she's evaluating herself,
Mhm.
and that means a lot to her. Um, but I know that she does have, like, check-ins, and they are, not rated in a way, but they are evaluated. I
Gotcha.
don't think it is similar to a teacher's evaluation.
Mhm.
Um, and there might be more supports in place where there aren't a lot of supports for teachers.
Yeah.
But just the concept of that this student who's resisting my instruction, like it is it sounds very personal,
Yeah.
because they're resisting my instruction.
And
They're
that's what
resisting
labels come into
my
play
classroom.
too, you
Yeah.
know?
Yep. Um, and when we step back, when we detach ourselves, when we check our thinking, especially cognitive distortions and negative, like reflexive or negative habitual thinking, it allows us to um, disentangle ourselves and
Yeah.
remove the emotional reaction, and so that we can respond productively like that doctor would respond
Mhm.
to the symptom. We can be more problematic, and it's just we're more clear-headed, right? Because if we're triggered, we are using our feeling brain, we're not using our thinking
Yeah, and
brain.
that's also, like, the brain state model coming into play right there too,
Mm,
operating in the executive state versus the
yep,
emotional.
right, yep. Yeah, so, um, I like that quote, that I like the analogy.
I like the analogy a lot too, and I also like analyzing the difference in training. Because
Mm,
doctors and medical professionals, they're taught to look at this pain as a symptom and to read it.
mhm.
I was never taught that about behavior
No,
formally,
I know.
until I started seeking that learning out. And the
Mhm,
teachers that we work with, I pull people every time I do a workshop, being like, okay, who learned about this? And no one
mhm,
raises their hand. We're
mhm.
learned or we're taught
Yeah,
how to manipulate the
mhm,
student into doing what we want or to punish them into doing what we
mhm.
want. And that's also one of the things that was directly warned against at the end of the chapter. And if you've listened to season 1, you also know all the reasons why those things are ineffective.
Yeah, yeah. Um, if you are interested in learning more about punishments and rewards and what that does to student motivation, you should definitely check out our first season,
Yeah.
which is based on Punished by Rewards by Alfie Kohn. The last episode we interviewed him, and I feel like that was a really good summary
Yeah.
of the chapter. But
Of the whole
there,
book, I feel like.
mhm,
Mhm.
yeah. Um, So I think that is a really good segue to um, one of the quotes that really stuck out to me. There were so many. This was a very, very good chapter.
They're
um,
all so good.
I know, I know. So um, this is on. Let me say here. Do, 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 do. I have a Kindle version, so it's harder to find my pages. Okay, so this is on page 94. And it says learning is not solely a cognitive activity. From a psychoanalytic perspective, learning is a psychic event. That is, learning involves an individual's ideas, emotions, drives,
Yeah.
wishes, and fears. Learning is supercognitive, to be sure, but it also involves interpersonal, intrapersonal, and affective components. That's why learners are often thrilled by what they learn, excited by new skills, frustrated by difficult knowledge, or angered by an awareness of injustice. We feel knowledge as much as we think about it.
I love how we highlight the same things.
Love that. I love that we feel knowledge
Mhm.
as much as we think about it.
Yeah.
And if So, I am a huge, supporter of if you want to if you want to prevent behavior, you have to find the emotional root, which
Mhm.
is those psychological needs that I mentioned before, right? And I think that's where we should go next, or, like, the psychological aspects, the emotional aspects of learning.
Mhm.
Um How do you feel, Ash? We should
Yeah, let's do it.
take that drive,
Let's do it.
that journey. Okay. Um, so I'm going to kind of touch on the 6 R's.
All right.
Uh, so in this chapter, it's all about, right? It's all about motivation. That's what we've been talking about. And Eric Toshalis says that we need to revise the 3 R's of learning, the reading, writing, arithmetic,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to redo them and think about 6 R's instead.
Yeah.
And those 6 R's
Very
are
different.
yes,
Reading, writing, arithmetic.
right, where it's just like that's the subject of what they're learning,
Mm-hmm.
and the 6 R's are more about how they're learning.
Exactly. And this is on page 115 for
Mm-hmm.
people following along in the physical book.
Yeah. So the 6 R's: results, relationships, reciprocity, rigor, responsiveness,
And relevance.
relevance, and oh wait, I already covered results, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think you
relevance.
started with results instead of relevance. But those are
Huh.
all the 6 R's. They're all there.
Yeah. So relevance, results, relationships, reciprocity, and responsiveness
And rigor.
and rigor. I kind of want to touch on rigor real quick, and then
Let's
maybe
do
you can
it.
cover one. Okay. So
I feel like rigor is like, sorry, I'm interrupting you already.
rigor.
It's almost like, what's
A
that
trigger
word?
word?
Yeah, like a trigger word. Like I hear rigor and I'm like,
I know. Fidelity.
yep, exactly.
Like I was actually responding to a comment on Instagram, and I went to go use the word fidelity, and I was like,
No,
ugh. But I love the word,
it's
like,
a
because
good word.
it's a good word.
I feel like we
like
just stigmatize things in education.
Well, I believe that it's been used so much with such little meaning. Like, are you doing it with fidelity? Well, what does that look like? What
Mhm.
does that mean? Do you know what fidelity means? Like, you're telling me that I need to do this with fidelity. Like, can you define the word for me? That was a rant.
That's what makes our podcast great for the listeners, though.
Because I know I'm not the only one that's thinking that
No, not at all.
in a PD that they're saying fidelity 6 times. Like, it's a buzzword.
It
It lost
is.
all meaning, and
Just
that's
like rigor.
rigor. But it's like the way that Eric Deschalis defines it is actually really relevant
Yeah.
and really important because students don't want to be patronized. I mean,
Shocker.
people don't want to be patronized. And if you think about education, or if you think about learning in the same way that like a gamer would think about video games. So
Mhm.
I'm a gamer, and I don't want my video game to be so easy that, like, it's boring.
Mhm.
That's not interesting to me.
I like this
And
metaphor. Keep
yeah,
going.
yeah, and I don't want it to be so difficult that I'm just failing over and over and over again. That's not interesting to me either. That's not
Yeah.
engaging. What is engaging is when it's a challenge, but it's doable.
Yeah.
And that is rigor. That is like the point where the kids are going to be engaged because they feel like they can be successful.
Mhm.
And it's not so easy that it's boring.
Yeah.
It's finding that, perfect. I mean, it's technically called zone of proximal development,
Yeah.
right? The ZPD.
That's what we
Um,
probably did learn about in teacher school.
yeah, ZPD. But you learned about I learned about what it was. I didn't learn about why it's so important because it influences motivation as much as
Yeah,
it does.
exactly. Which kind of leads us also back to kids feeling competent in themselves,
Mhm.
because I think sometimes as teachers, we're like, oh, they're struggling. Let's give them an easy win.
Yeah.
but an easy or like a win for them. Because he talks about this too. I don't know if Eric uses the words win, but it's like to show kids that they're actually learning and making growth. It's more like you highlight what they've done. Or you say, like, hey, by the middle of this lesson, you'll be able to do this new thing.
Mhm.
And you show the acquisition of skills. Like that is the win,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. And it's also important to combat negative thinking in our students
Hmm.
because focusing on the negatives, that's a huge mental, like, um I want to say problem issue. It's a huge mental obstacle, a mental block,
Hurdle.
hurdle. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to highlight those countering experiences that can counter the negative thinking, like, "Oh, I'm never good at this. I'm never gonna be good at this." Like, you were just good at this yesterday when you dot, 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 dot.
Yeah. And I also like the equations that he gave us in this section too, where he said, like, again, in students' minds, easier work equals more free time, which equals more autonomy. And what we need to
Mhm.
show them is that challenging work plus support plus autonomy equals growth, which equals freedom. And so
Ooh, yeah.
that's one of the things I always talk to my students about. It's like you're playing the long game for
Mm,
yourself. Like my goal is not that you get a 4 or an A in this class. Like you can do whatever you want to do someday.
mhm,
And that's freedom right there. Choices is freedom.
mhm,
And I think it's very easy to forget to emphasize that during the school day and to forget to talk about why and then the relevance of what we're doing, how it actually affects them in the grand scheme of things.
mhm.
And I don't know how many times I've talked to teachers too, working with them, where they start off a lesson by telling the kids, like, okay, I know this might be a bit boring today, but and I'm like, no. And then we wonder why there are issues.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
you just set yourself up for failure that way. You have to make the content relevant and show kids that what you're giving them isn't a 15-minute waste of their time. It's a building block to get wherever they want to go someday.
right. Well, not only, like, does that, like, completely, uh, negate not negate, but it completely decreases motivation.
Yeah.
It's also going to shut down the brain.
Mhm.
As soon as they hear boring, their executive functioning is going to turn off and their daydream brain or the default mode network. So you have two networks that operate, attentiveness, you could say. Like, the default mode network is your daydreaming state, and for people with ADHD and autism, um, that i that state comes on a lot more than a neurotypical person, and that's why, like, attention regulation is so hard. But then you have the cognitive control network, and that is the network that controls your cognitive functioning or your executive functioning. And if you hear boring, your brain's gonna process that word, and it's going to go into default mode network,
Yeah.
and it's gonna just check out. So don't say this is boring. I know, like, I
Don't
get
do
it.
it.
I get why you're saying that, like, but, you can make anything interesting if you are creative with your hooks.
And if you have the bandwidth to do it.
Yeah. Um,
I want to add that part in because I feel like a lot of teachers, like, they go in with all these creative ideas and things, but then I also like I try to help teachers who are like on the burnout doorstep,
mhm,
who we change things and then they feel renewed to the profession.
mhm.
So you come in with all these ideas when you start teaching how you want things to go.
Yeah.
But then when you're just struggling to make it through every 45-minute period and you feel completely demoralized,
Mhm.
the bandwidth for that creative thinking isn't there.
You're right.
And that's just one of the reasons why I gotta support their teachers.
Yep. Uh, there's also really good, like, ways to make it so that it's not like, that creativity isn't using up so much mental energy. don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
There are so many resources out there.
Mhm.
Use ChatGPT. If you have not started using
Yeah.
ChatGPT, you need to be on it. This holiday break, you should be learning how to use ChatGPT. Um, because you could plug in, this is my lesson. This is what these are my goals for learning. Um, give me a good hook, a good intro activity that will hook students.
Mhm.
And ChatGPT will give you like however many
Yeah.
examples you want.
Bunch of different ideas for how to do it. There's so
Mhm.
much technology out there.
Yes. So if you hear creativity and you think like, oh my God, that sounds so exhausting, there are ways around like that it's not going to take up all of your time
And
and
then
energy.
that little legwork too, like I talk about with teachers I work with, investing in your
Mm,
energy and putting
yes.
in that little bit of legwork up
Mhm,
front can buy you back so much time. Like even if you're feeling burnt out and tired and you greet your kids like, all right, guys, we're gonna do this today, we're gonna do this and this and this, you're gonna
mhm.
lose them. Whereas if
Yeah.
you fake it for 2 minutes and you're like, I have the coolest thing in the entire world to show you today. You will not
Mhm.
believe your eyes. Yes, even you, Brittany. You will not believe your eyes. And you get them like laughing and leaning in.
Yeah.
You're performing and you might feel like collapsing under your desk to take a nap. But
Mhm,
if you're able to keep that vibe going for a little bit, you buy their engagement for the rest of the class.
mhm. So this is like a hack, I guess you'd call it. Um, and it's from Persuasion by Richard Caldini, who's the all of his books are absolutely fantastic, but Persuasion was really good. And he talks about how you can influence how people feel persuasively. So through techniques, imagery, you can influence how somebody is motivated or is like bought in. And he talks about a CEO who would come into meetings and would start the meeting really like almost like to a whisper so that people had to lean in to hear him. And the
Yes,
body,
yes.
yeah,
I
if
talk
the
about that
bo
all the time.
yeah, yeah, so if the body has to lean in, it's physically in a position that's, like, telling the brain it needs to pay more attention.
Yep.
Yeah, there's
I
little
I
hacks like
used
that.
this. So the day before winter break in my classroom, it
Mhm.
was like the kids came in singing the 12 Days of Christmas, and I'm at the back table doing attendance, just joining in. I'm like, 5 golden
Yeah.
rings. And it's
Yeah.
just like a madhouse.
Uh-huh.
And then our superintendent walks in. I'm like, all right, everybody in your seats in 5. And I could do my clapping thing.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
get to 0, and I'm like, everybody, listen, I have updates for you. And I start whispering, and they're all like, what is she saying?
yeah.
But like even that, we went from singing the 12 days of Christmas at the top of our lungs dancing
Yes.
to everybody in their seats, leaning in and listening within
Mhm.
seconds.
Yeah,
It's skills, it's things
it
that
is.
you learn.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, there are so many little hacks like that,
Yeah,
like, we should do a podcast episode just on hacks.
we should, right?
Yeah. Or we could
So,
write our own book.
hey, I would not put that past
Boom.
us, Britt.
I know. Um, so you did a quote, I did a quote when then we talked about getting students' attention.
I think we should move on to motivation.
Okay.
And at the end of the chapter, how it talked about from teaching in the adolescent brain, this list of motivational techniques for educators to use to increase student motivation. And it's on page
Mhm,
118 and 119 in the book. I don't know if we want to read them all, but I'll read a few of them, like the main points.
mhm,
But basically, these are things we also have talked about on here too. Give choice, be careful with the labels we have for students, never quit on kids, and Be judicious, he says, in using rewards. Braden, I would say don't use rewards. Avoid the vague and frequent praise like good job and well done. Match every increase in challenge with an increase in support and differentiate both to make sure students are neither bored nor overwhelmed. Show the incremental steps that kids take to reach goals. And this is something I would do a lot too, where I would we've did projects before break. And I'd be like, okay, this class we're going to accomplish this. Next class it's going to be this, then this, and this, and this, and just highlighting that. And then as we would go through, I'd make it be like gray, the things we've tackled, just to show that progress. Teach students how their brain works. Stop any derision, mockery, or scorn the moment it occurs. Connect with our learners. Never tell students how smart or intelligent they are. And have a good hook or description of the topic's relevance when teaching to get kids bought in and invested.
Yes. I can't emphasize the need for good hooks
Yeah.
enough. Like, and there are so many resources out there if you just look up hooks, introductory hooks for a lesson, hook generation, ideation, hook ideation, and there are a lot of podcast episodes on it too, specifically, not cult for pedagogy. Oh gosh, what I can see the podcast thumbnail.
We can look it up and put in the show notes.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, let's do that. Truth for Teachers. Yeah, Truth for Teachers definitely suggests for like any technique skill building. So can we just go over for a couple of minutes, like stop any derision, mockery, or scorn the moment it occurs in the classroom, then co-build a culture of risk-taking, inquiry, and growth with your students. No one will be motivated to learn in an unsafe environment.
Yeah.
So how did you hold that boundary of, we're not going to mock, we're not going to scorn or make fun of failure?
I think it's twofold.
Mm.
So when those comments happen, addressing them, and if it happens publicly, address it publicly. Not in a way that is like, how dare you say that? Just like, we do this here. We say this here. But then I also think it's very important, and this is the part that we forget, how we talk to the student who made that comment matters. If this kid, let's say a kid makes a rude remark to a student and then we're rude back to that kid.
Yeah.
We're not going to create that culture. You have to be able to model like stating a boundary respectfully. And this is what throws kids for a loop every single year. Like stating a boundary respectfully and enforcing the expectations of an environment respectfully. And we would redo things. So like I had one kid this year who would make different comments. It's like one of those kids where they open up their mouth, you're just not sure what's going to come out each time. Like one of those. And so this child would make different comments at the start of the school year. Like they would say something and like 20 people would be like, oh, why would you say that? Like having a big reaction. And I'm like, whoa. We don't do that. Your options when they say that are to agree. You can raise your hand to question them, or you can be silent. We're going to retry this. Can you make your comment again? And so the kid would say the same comment, and then we would try it with those options.
Oh, yeah. So practice.
Yeah. Going back and practicing it.
Yeah.
But not in a way where it's like, how dare you? It's more of like, whoa, we don't do this here.
Yeah. I think that is much easier to uphold when you co-create your expectations and boundaries with the kids, because then they have a stake in the fact that, okay, well, we're not going to scorn, we're not going to bully, we're not going to make fun of failure. Um, and we made that an expectation at the beginning of the year.
Hmm.
And so
And
like
then you
you're
can
up.
use we as the pronoun
Mhm.
too.
Yeah, yeah. Dope.
Yeah. What about you?
Um, so I would co-create expectations. I really addressed like the triggering factor if a kid was being like using bullying behavior, um I or like saying mean things, scorning, um I would dive in to the why.
Yeah, and that can happen more one-on-one. Like, those aren't things you have
Right,
to do in front of the entire class.
right. So I did a lot of like circling back with individual students, and I would create my schedule to allow for that. Um, or I would have to pull them during like my planning or during my lunch but that helped me get to the roots of the issues to prevent the behavior from
Yeah.
happening. Um, and it's always, always rooted, associated with compromised need.
Mhm.
And typically it's competency. Like
Right.
they don't feel competent, and especially our students with disabilities, um, they exist in a society that tells them that they aren't competent,
Yeah.
and they don't present situations that allow them to feel competent because we're constantly being compared to an ableist ideal, like an able-bodied or neurotypical ideal. So uh I really hit home with the one-on-one, the conversations,
Yeah.
uh, and in the moment, like how you said, if it's a public comment, then it needs to be addressed publicly, and it's we don't, like, we
Yeah.
can do this.
Um, and I also wanna say too, if you're looking for a structure to have those one-on-one conversations, I have a
Mhm.
freebie that can help you. It's literally called the hallway flowchart because you can hang it in the hallway where you have those conversations and then you go
Yeah.
through it with the kid. If you
Mhm,
just go to any of my posts and comment the word flowchart, the
mhm.
automation will give you the link to get that freebie.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, flowcharts, definitely.
Mhm.
I also always suggest having a continuum of consequences. So you know what the consequences look like, what they're going to be. Um, you don't have to think about it really like, okay, if the student keeps saying the comment, this is, these are the steps that I take in this classroom. And if you have a continuum of consequences, the students will know the
What kind of
continuum.
continuum do you have?
Um, so the continuum that I had was okay. So we would start, it would just be like me addressing the issue. That would be like step one. Then it would be having a conversation with the student, like in the class, but I'd pull them out to the hallway and talk about like how they were feeling, what was going on, if there's any like history with the between the two students that might be arguing or being rude to each other. And then if the behavior continued, then I would pull the kid for a longer conversation, and this would happen. It would have to happen during their lunch or their recess or a free time that I organized in the classroom. Um,
And that's not out of punishment. It's more out of just necessity to have a conversation. Like, you
yeah,
need time to do that.
right,
I
right,
wanna make sure that's clear. Like, Brittany's not having kids just, like, sit in her room and not go to recess. Like,
right.
it's trying to organize time to have these conversations.
Yes. And so I would make sure that I would make sure that the conversation is really helpful to me understanding what's going on so that I can put supports in place. Um, and I would never try to take the whole recess.
Yeah, exactly.
It would like it would be more of a nuisance that it would be a punishment.
Yeah, no, and that's the same thing that I would do too. And I would tell the kids,
Mhm.
like, well, how long is it going to be? I'm like, however long it takes. Like, we just
Right.
need to accomplish this. And once we accomplish it, like, I'm not going to keep you
Like, you can go.
longer. Yeah, we just
Mhm.
need to talk through this. And I would also do after school as well. Like,
Yeah.
if we needed more time to do things, have them stay after school for a little bit
Mhm.
because you just need time. Like, that's honestly like our hardest issue as
Mhm.
educators, navigating the lack of time in our schedule to have
Right.
these necessary conversations to do our job well.
Yes. And so then after that, if the behavior continued, then there needed to be more supports put in place.
Mhm.
I might move the student. I might, um, it's all going to be dependent on what need I assessed as being compromised. And typically, if it's competency, then I would be very intentional about building building skill building activities that increase that student's feeling of competency specifically. So I would focus on that student increasing the feeling of competency
Yeah.
because that student's lack of competency was disrupting the whole room. So the little bit of time that I had to devote to focusing on that student ends up helping everybody
Mhm.
because that student is now engaged, feels better, is no longer bullying.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's the hardest part for teachers is because they see the big picture, they see all of their students. And when it comes down to prioritizing with like your consequence continuum or prioritizing assessing needs and providing supports and structures, you cannot get every student of every class.
No, you have to pick like, that's when I did a training on this with my group coaching
Mhm,
clients a few weeks ago about triaging and, like, how you go about that process in the classroom. It's a lot. It's a
mhm.
dance.
It is. Yeah.
Well, I feel like we should end now with our
Mhm.
action steps. So, what's an action step you have for educators?
Okay, so this is going to be like a plug, but it's
Love it.
so right.
Shameless.
Yeah, shameless. But I say it because it is absolutely like I find it absolutely necessary. If you're having issues with student behavior and you don't know how to assess for the compromised need, that's the safety, comfort, belonging, autonomy, and competency. You your action step should be to get the neurodivergent toolkit because it has over 100 strategies to help you support those needs. It defines the needs. It defines the ways that those needs are compromised for neurodivergent students, which we see is a huge, there is a huge difference in our neurodivergent kids and suspension and behavioral inappropriate behaviors compared to our neurotypical kids. So
Yeah.
if you have a student that is like continuously engaging in inappropriate behavior, they are probably neurodivergent. So the neurodivergent toolkit is one of the most successful resources that I have seen, like that really um, engages the intrinsic motivation, and so that's what I would suggest. That's my action
Mhm.
tip. And you can get
Yeah.
it on my website or comment toolkit or need on any of my posts.
Love it. For
Yeah.
my action step, it's going to be that even when things can feel bleak or demoralizing in the classroom, the only thing that you can do is start with you.
Mhm.
And that's where the big change comes from. Like everything we've talked about today, it all affects the kids, but we're not changing the kids. We're changing the things that we do to create
Mhm.
the change we want to see. So I just want to leave you remembering that you have power. You have your own autonomy. You have your own say over how things run. And if you don't like how they're running, then you have the power to change it. There's this quote, I forget who it's by, but it's like, you are not a tree. You can move. You
Yeah.
can change things for yourself. And if you are like, where do I even start? Message Brittany, message myself.
Mhm.
We're here to help you in your journey.
Yes.
All right,
All
that was a nice
right.
closeout.
Yeah. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you next week.
Right. Bye.
Bye.